After her husband's death, Leah and her daughter Jessica moved out of state and went to live with a man who, until they arrived, hadn't shown her what kind of person he really was. The constant abuse and mistreatment caused so much fear and suffering, leading to surprising and eventually extreme consequences. In today's touching story, we'll learn how Jessica ended up in an old man's mansion and what she found in the barn behind the house that changed her life forever. Leah was preparing dinner, and little Jessica was playing with her dolls in her bedroom. It was past the time when her father normally came home. The girl went to the kitchen to ask her mother when he would get home from work. Leah, her mother, smiled and asked the girl to be patient. Her father was involved in a big project and needed to work hard to bring home more money. He would come back as soon as he could. But that night, as the hours passed by and there was still no sign of her husband's return, Leah tried to remain calm. However, the flutter in her chest kept getting faster and faster. Eventually, the phone rang, and Leah jumped up to answer it. Little Jessica went to her mom, thinking it was her dad calling to say he'd be staying late at work. But the girl saw her mother's expression change. She was no longer calm, but horrified. And then she started crying, sobbing. It wasn't Peter, her husband, who had called, but his boss, to break the news of the tragedy. Peter had died in an accident at work. In the industrial complex, the scaffold on which Peter was standing shook and threw him off balance. Peter was unable to attach himself to the power cables he was installing and fell from a height of 10 meters. Her father's burial would be imprinted on Jessica's memory. The guilt-filled eyes of his co-workers, the despair of friends, and the silence of Leah, who was too dejected to show any other reaction. In a way, it was as if nothing was really happening, and eventually the little girl would wake up from that nightmare. But Jessica wasn't sleeping. This was real life. The young woman did not accept her father's death until much later. Without Peter in their lives, mother and daughter had serious difficulties in supporting themselves. Leah tried valiantly not to go without anything at home, but in addition to paying the rent, the income was not sufficient for all their demands. Jessica and Leah were forced to cut expenses drastically, living on the bare minimum and nothing more. Then, Leah met Jack, a man 10 years older than her. She was attracted to him and clung to him like a life jacket thrown to someone drowning in the ocean. In part, this was because Jack had convinced Leah to move with him to a town in Oregon, where Jack owned a home of his own. Leah had no prospects for improvement for herself and her daughter, so she concluded that she would have nothing to lose. Without thinking twice, Leah took Jessica and the rest of her belongings and moved into her new boyfriend's house. Leah had no idea what awaited her in another state with a man she'd met so recently. Jack told the truth about the house in Oregon. It was a good property for the three of them. But what Jack didn't tell Leah is that he suffered from alcoholism. Perhaps he had simply forgotten to mention that, or didn't bring it up, because he didn't think anyone in his company realized there was a problem. But the longer Leah and Jack lived under the same roof, the more often the man of the house got drunk and lost track. Leah held out as long as she could and tried to help, but it was very difficult to convince Jack that he actually had a problem. Also, when he drank, Jack was in the habit of validating his arguments with his fist. Sometimes he just threatened, sometimes Leah got really hurt, and from time to time he even turned to Jessica, who grew up very quiet and shy. Watching this man do all that damage to her and her mother, though quiet, Jessica was no fool and knew something was going to happen. After all, consequences do exist, right? The years passed, and the domestic abuse caused Leah to develop health problems. One night, after another fight between her and Jack, Leah felt sharp pains in her chest. Jessica, who was 15 at the time, called an ambulance. Leah resisted until rescue arrived and took her to the emergency room. But despite all the doctor's efforts, they were unable to counteract the heart attack, which ended up taking Leah's life. So, in a matter of minutes, Jessica became an orphan living in the home of an unbalanced and dangerous man. Without Leah around, Jack drank even more, turning the girl's life into an unbearable hell. Jessica lived that way for 3 whole years. She didn't know what to do to change things and didn't know who to turn to. She had a backpack ready, just in case she got to the point where she had to get out of there in a hurry, but she had nowhere to go and suspected the authorities wouldn't take her seriously. In that case, Jack would be even more hostile, even before drinking a single drop. In recent months, Jack had been looking at Jessica strangely and saying phrases whose meaning the young woman knew very well. Realizing her situation could get much worse, Jessica texted Kate, a friend, and told her everything she was going through. The friend stood by her side and said she could help. Kate was her last resort. That same afternoon, Jack came home from work and drank more than usual, so he became even more aggressive. At the height of his drunkenness, he went to Jessica's room and forced open the door. He launched himself at the girl, but she was more agile and managed to dodge. Jack ended up falling awkwardly on the bed and broke his nose, which was now bleeding. Jessica grabbed her emergency backpack and ran out the front door, leaving Jack behind. Drunk and furious, he screamed that Jessica was nothing but an ungrateful tramp. He said she had forgotten how he housed, fed, and clothe the girl for so many years. But Jessica ran and didn't look back. Tonight, she wouldn't live another minute of that hell. Kate welcomed Jessica. Jessica knew she couldn't just live there, so she started looking for a job the next day. At first, no one was interested in hiring a young woman with no experience at all, but she persisted a little longer and got a job as a cashier at a coffee shop. It didn't pay much, but it was a start. She did well with her tasks and wasted no time in attracting the attention of the locals. William, a student at one of the best universities in the country, was the young man who seemed especially enchanted by the new employee. William was used to always getting what he wanted, and seeing Jessica, he thought he would give the world to her. He started conversations, continued to frequent the cafeteria, and always praised Jessica's work. In a matter of months, they began dating steadily, and Jessica became a frequent visitor to William's house. The problem was that William's mother never liked Jessica and never missed an opportunity to tell her son how the girl's social conditions were different from their reality. The fact that the girl had no parents or no other relatives who cared for her weighed heavily on her mind. The mother thought it was okay for William to stay with Jessica for a while, but she felt a knot in her stomach when she thought about the possibility of them getting married or having children someday. She could never have expected what was going to happen next. Just 3 days before, Jessica broke the news that she was pregnant to William. The boyfriend was terrified of confronting his family, but there was no way out. After all, soon everyone would notice the girl's belly growing. Jessica then moved into William's house, and they planned that she would stay at least while she was pregnant. At first, William thought the arrival of her grandson might improve his mother's relationship with his girlfriend, but the situation only got worse. The boy, named Peter, was born, but things didn't work out for the family for the next 3 years. When he finished college, William got a job at a big firm in town and left all the work of looking after his son to Jessica. Jessica was then forced to listen to her mother-in-law's moral speeches and scoldings every single day. "This is not my grandson," she once said. "You deceived my son, but you won't deceive me. This boy doesn't even look like my son." In order not to make things even more difficult, Jessica didn't fight back against this nonsense and devoted all of her free time to little Peter. Even so, at night, when she remembered William's mother's words, she would cry with her face buried in the pillow. But the real blow came when the affair William was having with his boss came to light. He didn't even make an effort to hide that he was sleeping with an older woman. The boss liked the younger man and promised to help him progress in his career. It was another terrible ordeal in Jessica's life. Where would that take her this time? She didn't know. Without explaining, because she knew they no longer liked her anyway, Jessica packed her emergency backpack once more and returned to her friend Kate's house with Peter in her arms. Kate welcomed her, but made it clear that this time they couldn't stay long. She would wait until Jessica found a place of her own, however. With so much on her mind and a young child to look after, Jessica had no way of looking for a job more suited to her financial needs. She ended up taking back her job as a cashier at the cafe. What before were tasks that she took for granted now proved to be more difficult. Working and caring for a young child was no easy task, and she often arrived at work with dark smudges under her eyes, holding on as best she could to keep from falling asleep right then and there. The cafeteria owners did not see this situation very well, and her performance in customer service was far from attracting customers' attention like it was years ago. But would luck smile on her at least once in her life? Jessica hoped so. One day, an old man stumbled into the cafeteria. The owner of the establishment did not like what he saw and warned that the man should leave because this was no place for a drunk person. The man was pale and wouldn't take his hand off his chest. He couldn't really express himself. He seemed to be suffocating, and then he hit the ground. Customers and cafeteria employees stared at the scene in confusion, not knowing what was going on. Jessica was the only one who took action and called the ambulance right away. Thanks to this young attendant and the competence of the rescue team, he survived. His name was Oliver, and he had a heart attack. After the scare ended and he was fully recovered, Oliver returned to the cafeteria to find the person who had called for help in time to save him. The old man thanked Jessica and wanted to reward her in some way. Jessica didn't expect any recognition for what she had done and explained that her mother died of a heart attack when she was little. The man was moved and wanted to know more about her story, so Jessica told him everything. She told him all the difficulties and hardships she had lived up to that moment. The next day, Oliver returned to the cafeteria. Now he knew how to reward Jessica for saving his life. "I live alone in a mansion. I don't have any kids. I don't have a wife," Oliver said. "Come live with me. You and Peter stay as long as you need." Jessica thought about the offer for some time and decided to accept. Oliver made some changes to the deed and ended up leaving half of the mansion to Jessica and Peter as their own property. Peter liked the man and all the space he had to run, play, and explore. But Oliver's health was no longer the same as years ago, and 3 months later, he suffered another sudden illness. Feeling that this time life was going to leave him, he took Jessica's hand and said he had left the mansion to her in his will. But that wasn't what really mattered, so he told Jessica something that would make all the difference in their lives. "Behind the house is a barn. In the barn there's a tool bag, and behind this tool bag you will see a box. Everything in it now belongs to you and Peter." Jessica pulled free of the man's hand and asked him to hang on. She ran to call for rescue rescue, and the ambulance managed to get Oliver to the emergency room alive. The doctors stabilized the man, but his health was very poor, and it would be necessary to send him to the operating room as soon as possible. Surgery was expensive, and Jessica, of course, didn't have the necessary money. Then she remembered what Oliver had said about the barn behind the house and ran to see what she would find there. It was her first time entering. She turned on the lights and found the tools on the rather old table, but there was no box to be found. It really seemed like it had been a long time since anyone had entered the barn. Looking closer, she found the box on the floor, covered in dust. When she opened it, she saw a small cloth at the bottom enclosing a bag. When she removed the cloth, she found small nuggets of gold. In that instant, she knew exactly how she would pay for Oliver's surgery. Jessica later learned that Oliver got those nuggets from his son, who had disappeared in a mine in Alaska many years ago, so he thought the gold was cursed and kept it in a box. When his wife died, he had even more reason to think the nuggets were a bad omen and took them out of the house. But in the hands of Jessica, they turned out to be true lifesavers that gave him one more chance to live. And for the rest of the time he was in the world, Oliver was the grandfather Peter deserved to have. He treated Jessica just like she was his own daughter, being the caring and present father she hadn't had since she was a child. In the end, despite all the hardships and trials, none of them doomed her to unending happiness and forever loneliness. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like. Also, check out the other touching story that is appearing on your screen right now. Thank you for listening, and see you next time.